Hi and welcome to Conversations with Robyn. On today's program we have a man by the name of Sacha Molitorisz. And Sacha, amongst many things, is a journalist with the Sunday Herald and is also an author with his first book, From Here to Paternity. Sacha, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Hi Robyn, thanks.
What's it like being a new author?
Well, as we were talking about, being a new author and being a new dad, there's a little bit of a similarity there. It's great. This is my first book. I've been writing for a long time. I've always wanted to write. I studied English literature and law, so I've always been into words and various weird combinations of words. And I've always been into humour, and that's something I hope that comes out in the book. So this is a combination of that, and I guess the most important thing that's happened in my life, well, probably ever, I'd say, since the day I was born. You know, having a baby.
And what's her name?
Edie.
And how old's Edie now?
Edie turned 2, 10 days ago. So this book charts from roughly about conception, it talks a little bit before that as well, but about conception to just after her first birthday. Okay. So that fraught 2-year period.
And when was this published? Because we're now in September 2007. So when was the book published?
The book was published right at the end of July, start of August this year. So it's just come out. It's been out for about a month and a half. It was conceived, that word just seems to roll off the tongue when we're talking about this subject. It was conceived soon after Edie was conceived. Joe and I, my wife and I, were living overseas in Paris during most of 2004, and it was 2 days before we came home that we realised Jo was pregnant, and that was it was a shock, of course. It was really big news. And then we came back to Australia, and it was about a month or two after that I thought, look, I've been a journalist for, let's see, 13 years or so. I love writing. I've always wanted to write a book. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know it's going to be an amazing little trip. I know that this is going to be really life-changing, and I want to write about it. And the initial idea was just to write something funny, something light-hearted, not really incredibly substantial. And then that changed over time.
And it is. It's a very funny read.
Thank you.
You've got some great research notes in there also. How did you research this subject?
Well, that's how the book changed, actually, from the initial inception being something humorous and light. I started then having a little bit of a look around in bookshops to see what sort of books there were. Most of the books by dads, for dads, were like that, pretty flippant, not that substantial. And I realised as my wife's pregnancy wore on that I was having some unexpected emotions. I was much more anxious than I expected, and the whole experience, just thinking about this impending change, was a lot more profound. And that was before the baby even came along. So as that happened and I started realising there wasn't that much profound in the way of books that was out there.
For dads.
Yeah. I thought, look, I'll try to do the topic a bit more justice, and rather than just put my story down on paper and have a few laughs, hopefully, start researching, reading up, looking into a few journals on certain topics, and just sort of making the book a balance of memoir and humour, and on the other hand, some more substantial research into fatherhood in other cultures, fatherhood down the decades, how it's changed in Australia over the decades, fatherhood in the animal kingdom, those sorts of things. I found out things about, for instance, postnatal depression in men, something that I had no idea existed.
And also things, we'll get into dads feeling jealous of their babies.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a reality, and I can't even imagine how some men must give themselves a tough time over that.
Absolutely. Look, one of the things that I kept reading about and then discovered for myself is that with parenthood, and maybe even more so with motherhood, there comes a real sense of guilt that you're not doing enough for your child, that you're doing things the wrong way, because especially with a first-time baby, you just don't really know what you're doing. You're just making it up as you go along. So, and the jealousy is a big one. That was a real surprise for me, just to read about it at first a little bit and then to experience it. Because to sum that up, in a nutshell, a lot of these things, you can't really encapsulate in a couple of easy sentences, because they're emotions that sort of pop up a little bit and then they go away and come back. It's such an emotionally complex time, the pregnancy, and then especially after the child is born. But with the jealousy, you go to the hospital, you and your partner, and there are two of you, and you come home and there are three of you. You know, so everything changes. The dynamic between you and your partner is very different, and it really does feel for the man a lot of the time. Certainly in my experience, there were times after Edie was born that I felt like the third wheel. I felt like the least important person in that relationship. I'd go off to work, I'd earn the money, I'd support the family, but the baby was the most important, the most dependent, the most helpless. And Mum needed, Jo, my wife, needed a lot of support as well, and she was doing this important job and breastfeeding, and as a dad you just kind of feel almost irrelevant, and certainly not as loved and important as you were.
Well, I remember also one of your male friends said to you that it's not actually real until the baby comes into the world.
Yeah.
So how was that for you?
Oh, very much so, yeah. A number of people said that to me. And it was, again, there are so many emotions and aspects to that question. But during the pregnancy, I found it was actually a much more intense time than I expected. And I don't think all men feel that. A lot of men don't feel much during the pregnancy. And this particular friend, for him, he didn't feel that much, I think, during the pregnancy. Then when the baby came, all of a sudden it was very real in his arms. And for me, you know, to an extent, that's right. It was only real then because only then did I really know what I was dealing with. And in a sense, you know, I don't want to harp on about the negatives because it's such a challenging time becoming a dad, let alone becoming a mum. But there are all these tiny joys that sort of pop up every now and again. And as I'm finding more and more so as your little one gets older and the bond between you and your little one continues to grow. I mean, the large part of my inspiration for writing the book became just to talk about and to get people to talk about fatherhood, because I don't think it's talked about all that much. I mean, the stereotype is that blokes don't talk about their emotions all that much, and there is truth to it. You know, I don't talk about my emotions as easily as my wife does. So hopefully, with the book, I'm encouraging blokes to talk about their emotions, blokes and women to talk about fatherhood, and just to examine fatherhood, because I think the role of fatherhood is still really being worked out. We're still working out what it is fathers should do, what they are doing. You know, that's still something that's in flux. Our society's not, those rules or those parameters for dads aren't really nailed down.
Well, before we go more into the book, what about your personal journey? You were born in Germany?
I was.
Okay. How many siblings?
I've got none. I'm an only child.
Okay.
And I just assumed that I wouldn't really have children until about my late 20s when that changed. But yeah, I was born in Germany. My family came to Australia when I was 4 years old in 1973. As I like to say, we came to Australia the same year that the Opera House was unveiled. You know, two enormous, momentous occasions for Sydney they were.
Sacha in the Opera House.
That's right, yeah, that's right. And I've lived in Sydney ever since. You know, this has been my hometown, so I'm much more Australian than German, but I still feel those German roots. And we just actually, about 2 months ago, went back to Munich, which is the town where I was born, and saw my grandmother, so Edie's great-grandmother. Okay. And that was really very a special time in a way that I couldn't have predicted, because Edie was not yet 2, and you don't know how she's going to take to someone who's so much older than her. She's never really been around someone anywhere near that age before, and they don't speak the same language. You know, my grandma speaks German and no English, so they didn't speak the same language. Edie's just learning to speak, and yet she's quite a good communicator when she wants something. And they had a really great bond, which surprised me, which was great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we'll take a break and we'll come back and find out more about Sacha's journey and about his book From Here to Paternity. Stay with us.